Right. What I'd like to do in my few minutes is to tell you a little bit about a project that we've just finished for Joseph Rowntree Foundation, also partly funded by the UK Commission for Employment and Skills, which asked us to look forward and try and think about what the prospects were for poverty and inequality in about 10 years' time. As has been said in the introduction, we've been involved in doing work on forecasting the labour market for a number of years as part of the Working Futures series. The idea of this project was to try and take that kind of information and link it up with the work that has been done previously by the Institute of Fiscal Studies to explore how changing structure of employment might have implications for poverty and inequality. Now, of course, there are some who would argue that any attempt to project the future is misguided. My response to that is that yes, that's true. We can't predict the future with any precision, but nevertheless, I think we can all plan and prepare for it. And essentially, that's what we're trying to do in this kind of exercise. We're trying to do some conditional projections which give us some insight into the way the wind is blowing in the labour market and what its implications are for poverty. Now, of course, there are different approaches to planning. This is the ostrich approach. The gentleman has his head buried in the sand. I think the idea of the kind of exercise we're talking about is that we can do better than that. I mean, I think actually ostriches have had rather a poor press here. Apparently, the evidence is that ostriches don't actually spend their time with their heads buried in the sand. The exception being some female ostriches who have been known to spend a lot of time bending down, feathering their nests, waiting for the next generation, which I suppose just illustrates how some of these old wives' tales can be absolutely useless. So, what I want to do is to just give you a few insights into the kind of results that emerge from both the Working Futures projections and the work that we've done to try and draw out the implications of all of that for poverty. So there are two main messages, I think, that emerge from this. And in a sense, it's a cautionary tale, given some of the insights that have emerged in the earlier discussions today. I think we're all agreed that investment in education and skills is important, and generally speaking, it's good for both the individual and for the country as a whole. But on the other hand, I think it's also important to be aware that just because we invest in something doesn't mean to say that we'll get a positive return. It's very important that we invest in the right things. Let me just very briefly run you through some of the results from the Working Futures projections. Some of you will have seen these already. They were published around the turn of the year. I think the main results are not going to be too surprising to most people in the room. We're envisaging a changing economy in which there's a great deal more emphasis on knowledge and service activities. And that has important implications for skills, as measured by either occupation or qualification. This slide here illustrates what's happening in terms of occupational structure. And I think the patterns that are emerging won't surprise many people in the room. On the one hand, we have quite substantial increases in the higher level occupations, managers, professional occupations, associate professional and technical groups. These are occupations that generally require quite high levels of academic, if not vocational, education and training in order to do them successfully. But one thing that perhaps isn't quite so widely appreciated, although there has been some discussion about it earlier in the day, is that there is a polarisation going on, and there's also some increase in employment amongst some much less skilled occupations, particularly in Group 6, the caring, leisure and other service occupations, and also amongst some elementary occupations, the people who are involved in things like cleaning and helping to serve in restaurants and this kind of thing, where you don't necessarily need a huge amount of education and training in order to be able to do the job successfully. The other main feature of the results that emerge is an increasing share of employment held by people who've got high formal qualifications. This has been going on for some considerable time, and this diagram illustrates it quite clearly, I think. At the top, you have the proportion of the workforce who are employed who've got high-level qualifications, roughly degree level or equivalent. And you can see this has been going up steadily since the year 2000, and we're projecting that that pattern will continue. If you contrast that with the bottom, that's the proportion who have either no or low formal qualifications. You can see the opposite is true there. We're seeing a sharp reduction in those shares. That, of course, raises a few questions, though. What's the cause of this? For many years, government policy of all colours has been to increase the supply of skills by encouraging more young people, in particular, to go into higher education. And that's very much reflected here. So the question is this a demand or a supply-led phenomenon? And of course, there are some who've argued, I'm thinking here of Phil Brown and his colleagues at Cardiff, that we can't expect that necessarily all of the good jobs are going to come here to the United Kingdom. The Minister made some remarks about that in his speech a few minutes ago. I think there's a very real issue about how successful we can be at actually making sure that we achieve an economy in which our workforce is largely in this higher qualified and high skilled occupational groups. When we try to work out what the implications of those changing employment structures are for poverty, these are the sorts of patterns that emerge, and they're quite stark. I mean, I think when we first started the exercise, there was a general idea that if we invest in the right sort of areas in terms of skills or qualifications, then surely this is a good way to try to deal with the poverty problem that we're facing. But as Robert Joyce said in the previous session in this room that some of you will have seen, actually it's a lot more complicated than that. And when you look at the poverty rates on the far side, we've got relative poverty rates. The blue bar is the situation in 2009-10. And the red bar shows what we're projecting to happen given the kinds of patterns of employment that we're talking about in working futures. And you can see that for most groups, relative poverty is actually going to worsen. And that's also true of absolute poverty, which perhaps is even more of a surprise. Part of that is due to the changing employment structure. If we actually hold employment structure fixed, which is what the green bars show us, then that actually improves the situation a little bit, but not that much. If we wanted to reverse the worsening of these poverty indices, we would actually have to turn the tide back a considerable way in terms of the kind of structural changes that are taking place, and that's not really a very realistic prospect, I think, for government policy. So the key findings that emerge from the study are that poverty and inequality are set to increase, in some cases quite sharply. Employment structure is exacerbating this, but the main reason for it is the interaction of what's happening in terms of inflation and government tax and benefit policy. Policies aimed at shifting the structure of employment towards particular sorts of groups are not likely to be terribly useful in reducing poverty rates. And the reasons for that are threefold, and Robert mentioned them in the earlier session. The first obvious point is that many individuals in low-income households are not actually in work at all. And anything we do to change the structure of employment is clearly not going to affect them. The second is that a lot of these changes that we're talking about actually increase the height of the bar that we're measuring poverty by. And both the pay changes that are likely to take place and the structural changes in employment both serve to raise median incomes and hence increase the level of the poverty line. And finally, incomes at household level are the key focus when we come to talk about poverty, but often labour market policy and issues are focused on individuals. And so there's a disconnect, if you like, between the way in which policy operates in the labour market and what it means for poverty. Household composition, therefore, is crucial. Being a low-paid worker is not a good indicator of being in a low-paid household. So we need to find ways of targeting policy much more closely on those who really need to be helped. General policies aimed at increasing the level of skills in the labour market, I think, a very poor way of trying to achieve the kinds of objectives that we have in the policy and equality agenda.
Brilliant stuff, Professor Wilson. Very, very intriguing insights into the future. And we're now going to go over to Stephen.
Thank you. It was pointed out earlier that the UK economy is about 1.2 million workers short of being fully employed, let alone being fully productive. And that's true in part. But there are some significant skill shortages in the very industries that are going to lead economic growth. And as you heard from the previous speaker, all the new jobs that are being created tend to be quite high-skill jobs, and not all of the young people that we're preparing have got the skills necessarily to compete for those jobs. So just in my sector, IT, where we've got actually 113,000 new jobs being created over the next few years, and we've got a shortage of vacancies now of 50,000 people, there's a real mismatch, and there's a real danger that the UK economy has the sort of the double-headed problem of skill shortages in key sectors, which means that you don't get the economic growth, combined with a stubbornly high level of unemployment, particularly amongst the young, of people who can't compete effectively for those jobs. And addressing that means that we have to better connect up supply and demand in the labour market to make it more responsive. And the big challenge, clearly not everybody comes to fill jobs from the formal education system, but there's at least a 7-year lag. So if we start doing things right in schools today, it's at least 7 years before we're going to see the benefits of that in future. Now, the businesses that will be creating lots of the economic growth operate differently to many of the businesses that exist today. It's impossible to generalise, but certainly one of the things, whether you're looking at IT, pharmaceuticals, advanced manufacturing, even the financial services sector, which we shouldn't neglect, it's an important driver still in the UK, all require people with so-called STEM skills, science, technology, engineering and maths. And there's a kind of a way of thinking that you learn through those disciplines that is absolutely crucial to success in those economies. And the problem that we have as an economy is that we're just simply not producing anything like enough people with the STEM skills at everything from very basic entry level all the way up to computer science PhDs and everywhere in between that's going to be needed to drive those kind of future jobs and future growth. And to cap it all, we're slipping in comparison with our international competitors who, for very obvious reasons, are very keen to attract digital economy businesses to operate and grow in their economy. And I'm not sure that it's as simple as just a few business class flights relocating overseas. But we've seen Canada, for example, really going after the UK gaming industry and trying to persuade it to move across and set up over in Canada rather than grow here. So it's a very real threat. The issue presents itself as a shortage of young people with STEM degrees. For example, the number of British students studying engineering and technology has declined by 5,700 over the past 10 years. So in a situation where there's growing demand, we've actually got reducing supply. But the problem starts much earlier. It starts at school. And the PISA survey, which is an international comparison of students and across 65 developed countries, showed that the UK scores had stayed flat over the last 3 years. And we've slipped internationally from 24th to 27th in maths and from 14th to 16th in science. So we're not really making progress, and frankly our competitors are overtaking us internationally. And so the relative underperformance means that less young people go on to study STEM subjects at GCSE, and then A-level, then university, and then in the workforce. So the sad irony is we've got many, many unemployed young people. We've got lots of companies. We're already creating really good jobs. I mean, clearly in the current economic conditions, we could do with more, but that will come. And we're just not joining the two things up because they have to not only have studied at the right level, but they also have to study the right subjects and have the right capabilities. So, you know, to be perfectly straight with you, it's not good enough and something needs to change. Now, we're trying to be at the vanguard of taking on the challenge. I set up a couple of years ago a program called Britain Works, which helps people get skills, particularly IT skills, to get them into work. And without going into much detail, because I know time's short, we do apprenticeships to take youngsters with just a few GCSEs and train them up into IT jobs in these small companies. We work with charities who are engaged in employment and skills. And we also have a massive program. It was mentioned about the 600 training centres. You know, we work with a massive number of organisations that are providing basic digital literacy skills to help people get into work. There's got a lot of work to do. We're about 2/3 of the way through, and we've reached about 370,000 people through that programme. So there's some good progress, and I think industry has got a role to step up and do its bit to help prepare the next generation. We're also doing a lot of work around computer science in schools to try and really make it another core discipline. But there's also a role for government and for policy. The sort of three things I think that's a priority to get right. One is get more young people studying STEM subjects, and I'll finish on this. STEM subjects at school by training more specialist teachers and actively encouraging pupils who are capable to study computer science, to study triple science, and to study mathematics when they're at school. And I'd like to see computer science included in the English Baccalaureate. I described it to Nick Gibb the other day as the new Latin. It's certainly a very important subject. The clue's in the name. It's computer science and should be recognised as that. And I certainly don't want anybody who could study or wants to study triple science or mathematics at A-level to be rationed from doing so. And that's the situation at the moment in many schools. Number two is to provide more funding and places at university for British students to study STEM subjects. Even if that's at the risk of reducing, and I know this will be controversial, reducing funding and places for subjects that don't have so much importance on the economy. I do know that as a society we need to look at whole education, and there's other, the arts are important and so on, but we are at a point of economic crisis, and I think at this point we have to just be really focused on what will drive economic success. Once we've generated that, we can then share the wealth and the benefits of that more broadly. So nobody capable of meeting the requirements for a STEM degree should be turned away from a place, as happens today. And there's no point increasing the supply earlier on if that just means more people aren't able to get a place at university. And then the third thing, because not everybody could or should go to university, is around apprenticeships. And the government has and continues to fund apprenticeships, and we welcome that. It's often said that not enough employers, and especially SMEs, provide apprenticeships. I've been working over the past 2 years with lots of small companies, and they want to take on young people. They, to come to Chris Grayling's point, they want to take on local people. The system makes it too hard for them to do so, and then blames them when they don't do it. And all we've done, frankly, is just make it easy for small business owners to step through the door, give young people an opportunity, and to create jobs. The continued support for the government in doing that is really important. So let's not underestimate the scale of the challenge that faces us in securing the future skills we're going to need to grow the economy from the place it is today. But I firmly believe that by concerted and long-term and integrated action between industry and with government, that we can ensure that our young people get the skills they need to get the jobs that are going to be there in tomorrow. Thank you.
Stephen, thank you. I'm particularly taken with your idea of computer science as the new Latin. Now, over from the employer perspective to the JCB perspective, Julian.
Hi, good afternoon. It's interesting, I was sat there listening to Chris Grayling and I'm thinking to myself, we've got very similar speech writers, and I've just been rewriting in my head what I'm going to say now. So that's the first challenge, and I very much welcome what Stephen's just had to say actually, because what I'm going to focus on is how we could better engage with business, or business can better engage with Job Centre Plus and the plethora of partners that Job Centre Plus have in actually to actually make the transition into work a lot easier for some of our people, customers that we engage with. So for me to start this off, I think we need to remind ourselves of who we're here to serve and who our customers are in terms of the communities and the roles that we have to play in that. So for me, there are three customers really that my organisation really serves. There's the unemployed, there's the employed, who's the taxpayer, and there's also employers who I'm going to focus on. So a few things from me on the unemployed. So there needs to be a recognition that when you become unemployed, this is one of the most catastrophic life-changing or life instances that happens for individuals. So we know that if you're unemployed for a period of up to something like 3 months, you're twice as likely to suffer anxiety and depression and so forth. As you go through to 6 months to 12 months, that probably quadruples to 10 to 12 times. So it's an absolutely life-changing experience when you become unemployed, especially if you've got skills deficits. The other thing in terms of that Chris Grayling touched on around the characteristics of our unemployed people, it's changing. So we have more professional executives, people in management grades that we wouldn't traditionally have dealt with that are now flowing through to our doors. And it's to actually say that it's not complex would be an understatement. So the characteristics you do have, as Chris said, those that don't want to work, but the vast majority of people that actually come and engage with us do want to work, they do want to better themselves, they do want to improve their life chances. And then our second group of customers, employees, people that are employed who are taxpayers. For me, I'm a taxpayer, so I want us to be efficient. I want us to get people into work as quickly as possible, and I actually want us to actually add and give value for money. So when you take into account, or if you take the perspective of those first two customers being people who actually drive demand, the role of business is absolutely essential, because if they're driving demand and economics and global factors are driving some of that demand, the supply side is absolutely essential. And the supply side for me is business, is colleges that actually provide those opportunities in the world of skills and preferably in the world of employment. So for me, the role of business in helping people back into work, yes, it's primarily about jobs. Yes, we do want jobs as an organisation, and any of our work programme provider partners will tell you we want jobs. I think it's more than just about jobs. It's about creating opportunities for individuals. It's about creating and also educating them and progressing them into work. I could labour on and build on the stuff that Chris Grayling talked about in terms of work experience, which is a massive, massive opportunity for some people that we engage with. That's, you know, and it's been well documented in the press, and some of the bad press that has got. But actually, what's really happened since then is actually we've been overwhelmed with opportunities and employers wanting to engage with us around that. And actually, a lot more of our customers say it was probably one of the best bits of publicity that we've ever had, if I'm totally honest, as an organisation, perversely. So it's really, really, really important. But we've got a whole offer within job centres that a lot of people don't know about. So when I engage business, when I engage the likes of Tesco's, McDonald's and other FTSE 500 companies that I actually go and meet with, which is part of my job, they don't know we have an offer. So they don't know that we can actually match and screen customers for them to actually place them into jobs. I think the new enterprise allowance was touched on earlier, and I think there are some limitations around that. Don't tell the Minister I've said that, one of his employees, so that you have to wait 6 months for some of that. But I have flexibility within my budget to actually pay and put on those sort of like pre-enterprise allowance type courses. So I work with local authorities, chambers of commerce, I work with employers as well, and SFA to actually put on what we call sector-based work academies, where we actually put people through training, we pay for some of that, the employer then takes them on for a period of time, and once they've done that, they get a guaranteed interview in some instances. So there's a whole raft of things that we do within job centres that can actually aid that, but employers and actually bringing them to the table is absolutely essential in making that work. A couple of other things in terms of how we're preparing for the future. We're about to actually move all of our sort of like job matching and job screening online. So that should actually play into the hands of business. So actually, if there's another role for business for us, it's actually coming in to actually educate some of our customers. So yes, we want jobs, but we also want you to be mentors. We also want you to come in and actually engage with our customers, and not just our customers, actually, the customers of our work program providers and our partners that are actually helping us actually take this whole agenda forward. It's pretty essential. So if there are a couple of things from me in terms of summing up, I'm just going to end up repeating what Chris Grayling said otherwise. There is something about early engagement for business, and actually Stephen's absolutely right. Across my district, all of my borough partnership managers go into schools, and actually it would be really good if we were actually going in there talking to them about the world of work with employers with us. So you know, they make really key important decisions at key stage 3 at the age of 13. And I know that and the facts show us that if they don't make those decisions, it feeds directly through to people becoming NEETs. So these are the people not engaged in employment, education or training. The evidence is actually quite not counterfactual. The evidence is quite astounding when you look at it. So it's early engagement for me. If there was another role for us in engaging employers or employers engaging us, I think Stephen's hit the nail on the head again. We have to hide the wiring, especially for the small and medium employers who don't necessarily have all of the resources at their disposal to actually engage with the world of government, the world of skills. So there's something about actually us working together to hide the wiring for them. And if there's a third thing I would want in terms of from business is actually they need to understand our offer, so they need to be willing to engage us and our partners in that. Thank you very much.
Julian, thank you very much. I'm struck once again, as I was when I spoke to you the other day, that there are always things going on at JCP that one doesn't necessarily know about. You talked about your engagement with schools, which is, again, a completely new thing to me that I didn't realise you were doing. So that's the job centre point of view. Now from one of Britain's largest employers.
Yes, largest private sector employer. Yeah, it's true. Yes, almost 300,000 people now. So the question of how we deliver a fully employed and productive labour market, obviously a big question. I was going to, in the theme of speakers this afternoon, think about three things. It's obviously a common approach. The first of which was creating the right environment for businesses to grow, invest and to create and sustain jobs. The second is the challenge of addressing some of the specific issues in the labour market, of which I would highlight youth unemployment and long-term unemployment, particularly in the regions. And then the third one, ensuring an appropriately skilled workforce. There's clearly overlap and interconnection between the three, but I think we're addressing them in turn. So the first one, the right environment for business and others to create jobs. I could be here all afternoon talking about that. It's a range of factors, as you will have heard from earlier speakers, ranging from a strong and stable macroeconomic environment, a good regulatory framework, planning system, proper skills, targets and incentives. And I think it was interesting listening to Stephen earlier about the focus on STEM skills and the importance of those sectors that are growing. But one point I did want to make under that theme was also we need to look about where the potential for big growth in jobs is coming from. And retail is one of those sectors. We are, as a sector, the biggest employer in the UK with almost 3 million employees. It's a sector that continue to create jobs in even tough times. So today we've announced our results and we're talking about 20,000 additional jobs in the next 2 years. And these are varied jobs, good jobs, rewarding jobs that give people the opportunity to build a career. The second area was these specific labour market challenges that were mentioned. Youth unemployment we've been talking about a lot, and long-term unemployment, particularly in certain regions. And you don't need me to tell you about the human and economic cost of youth unemployment. We all know what a huge waste of potential it represents. And equally, we know there are too many families and too many communities where there is a cycle of worklessness. I think the statistic is 1 in 6 children live in households where no one has a job. So what to do about it? I think it's partly about opportunity, so that is about the job creation, but also about creating them in those areas and for those people who need them most. I'll come back to retail again, as you would expect, and Tesco in particular. We're the largest private sector employer of young people. So we employ over 70,000 people under the age of 25. We also invest and create jobs in communities across the country, including the most deprived. So I think there's a big challenge at how we make sure those communities are attractive to other private sector investment. So there is those opportunities for those people. The second is how you then target those opportunities to make sure that those people who need them most are best able to take advantage of them. There's obviously skills, which I'll finish with. There's also about the understanding of the world of work. There's been lots of talk about work experience, but actually making sure people understand what's expected of them in the workplace. And then it's about employers also looking at potential and aptitude, as well as just qualifications and experience. So a slightly different approach. Another Tesco example, we've got something we call a regeneration partnership scheme. And this is where stores in areas of high unemployment, we guarantee at least a third of the jobs for the long-term unemployed. We opened 42 of these stores so far, helping over 4,500 long-term unemployed back into work. And the way that we do that is through doing face-to-face interviews and training. So that's about looking at not people's skills or people's qualifications, but people's keenness to work with us, their attitude, their willingness and their appetite for work. Then we do 6 weeks pre-employment training. We work in partnership with Job Centre Plus and local training providers to make sure they're work ready. And as long as they complete that pre-employment training, then they're guaranteed a job at the end of it. And it's supposed to be a really successful programme. Our latest store opened in Widnes a couple of weeks ago. Of the 200 jobs that have been created, over half have gone to the long-term unemployed. And I think I could reel off statistics, but I think the most powerful is when you actually think about the individual examples of people who found work through those schemes. So Craig, 30, unemployed for a year despite having applied for over 50 jobs. Kieran, who's 17, had very good GCSEs but hadn't found anything for over a year. Andrea, who's 40, he'd made redundant from the local council, applied for lots of roles but hadn't even managed to get an interview until she came to find a job at Tesco. And Denise, 34, a full-time mum who hadn't had a job for over 5 years. And there's plenty of those examples. And I think that's what's really powerful about how you can actually make sure you're targeting the opportunities that are being created, and they are still being created for those people where there's a particular need. And looking in a slightly different way when you're judging people as to appropriateness for jobs, not just on a traditional CV basis. And the final area which we have had discussion around is on skills. It's obviously about both formal schooling and also about the ongoing training and development that an individual gets in the workplace. I'm not going to stand here and say what should be in the curriculum, and what we look for in the bulk of the people we employ is probably slightly different to what the likes of Microsoft look for, although we do have people who are specialists in engineering and IT and finance and all the rest of it too. But as all employers, we obviously look for a good standards of literacy and numeracy in people leaving school. And we also do look for some of those softer skills, so the ability to work in teams, to communicate, to problem solve, to be able to deliver great customer service. As an employer, we also have a responsibility to deliver training ourselves. That's a responsibility to our employees, but also it makes complete business sense. It means our people are obviously better equipped to be able to deliver the service we want them to be able to deliver to our customers. And that's about practical vocational training. We've touched on apprenticeships already, and we're expanding our apprenticeship programme to 10,000. It's been proven very successful, and that's about retail skills, some specialist skills, and things like bakery and butchery, as well as things like finance at a high level. Then it's also about leadership training to make sure that people can actually have a career at Tesco. They could start off at the checkout and end up at chief executive, which is the story that is often told by Tesco, but happens to be true. And then also have the culture and processes which actually enable you to move people on throughout the career, so talent planning, mentoring, and actually that's led to us over 80% of our management positions are filled internally. So 3 areas I touched on briefly: the right environment for job creation, action to address specific labour market challenges of youth unemployment and long-term unemployment in specific regions, and then a properly skilled workforce.
Again, there's a lot of different interesting things in there, sort of combination of the targeting of the opportunities on particular people, and then also this shifting of focus from CVs to the more general aptitude. I'd be interested in knowing perhaps more in Q&A about how you go about doing that. Lastly, but absolutely not leastly, over to Matt.
Okay, I want to be quite brief, but I think what I want to do is return to where we kicked off the conference, and perhaps that's going to be a bit gloomy, unfortunately. It was with me saying that despite thinking in the years up to the recession that we'd cracked the labour market and we'd sorted labour market policy and how the labour market functioned, I don't think we have. I think there's still huge structural problems in the UK labour market, and despite all of the talk from the ministers we've heard today, whether that be the coalition ministers or the opposition, I don't think that any of them have the answers. I think there's some good things going on. I think the work programme is effective, and I think it will prove a good thing. I think that some of the ideas that Junior's laying out in Jobs and the Plus, is exactly the right way to go. But that is only one district in a whole network of Jobs and the Plus. And I think what we need to do is actually be honest in this audience and then try and sell the message outside of this audience that there's an awful lot of a long way to go yet, and we need to keep pushing the government to actually think about the next stage in welfare reform, in employment policy. And that's about thinking not about 2015, 2016, but thinking about 2020, 2025, and how we actually get a labour market which is modern enough and suits the needs of both business in the labour market, but also make sure that disadvantaged groups are brought into the labour market, and we are trying to tackle some of the broader issues which some of the breakouts have covered today. And again, to stick with the theme, I think Policy Exchange has 3 broad areas where we might think that more needs to be done, and where, as a plug, we're going to be doing some more work over the next year or so. So the first of these is around the personalisation of employment support. Despite what the coalition says, we don't think enough personalisation happens. For some people who aren't under 24, who aren't moving off employment support allowance off IB, incapacity benefit onto JSA, they have to wait for 12 months to get to the work programme. That's an immensely long time for barriers to grow, for people to become demotivated. What we'd like to see is much more personalised and targeted support right from day one of an employment claim, which says this person isn't going to find work, they're very unlikely to find work because they've got these significant barriers. Let's send them to the work programme or to some kind of support service right from day one. And let's do that in a payment by results framework. Now that's going to take quite a bit of change in both work programme contracts. It is also going to talk perhaps a lot about what one of the sessions I was in earlier is joining up employment and skills. And maybe that some of these people who are finding it very hard to get jobs, maybe it's a lack of skills or lack of basic training where they're having problems. And making sure that we're tying up those sorts of agendas across Whitehall, I think is really important. Not similarly there, you can talk about justice, you can talk about local government. And I think the theme of a number of the sessions have been that this isn't tied up at all. I think Tony from Inclusion mentioned earlier there's 47 different funding streams for young people who are unemployed. Now, that's just not sensible. So how can we consolidate and plan this better across government? I think is a particularly interesting area. Secondly, and those of you who see me speak before will heard me rant about this endlessly, that it has to be more than just making work pay. Making work pay is fine, but most of the academic literature you'll ever see on making work pay says for a large majority of groups, it doesn't make that much difference, especially if the changes are only quite small. And that's what we're going to see from universal credit. The changes are really quite small, particularly where you have areas where dependency has grown, there's a lack of trust in government, people don't believe the messages that government's giving them, or Job Centre Plus are giving them, or work programmes are giving them. What then do you do where people don't believe the message that work pays? Some of the work we're going to look to do is try and tackle some of those issues head on and say, you know, where do people get their information from? How can we try and make people believe what the government's saying, make people believe that work does pay, and change the attitudes towards work that some people have? Finally, and this is again an area where I think actually the Minister, or Chris Grayling, was strongest. It's around rewarding individual responsibility. I think this is really important, and it's not just in the employment area of employment. It's important in terms of conditionality. It's also important in terms of skills, where we talked today about the number of kids leaving school without 5 A-C GCSEs or who are functionally illiterate. We can't have a system where we actually allow that and actually say, provide a system that says, okay, we'll support you for the rest of your life because you've done that. We have to have a system which actually rewards personal responsibility and makes it clear to people from the start that actually there are certain things that need to be done. I think Chris Grayling was very right here in saying that we can't get the kind of system, labour market we want, and it can't be given on a plate. And I think that has to be very clear across the board, both in employment, in unemployment, and in skills. So what should we do there? And I think we've talked a lot already in Policy Exchange about the conditionality system, about making sure that people are doing all they can to find work. But I think it also has to go further than that, and perhaps we should look to, the government's currently looking at proposals around child benefit and conditionality. Not necessarily sure that all of us at Policy Exchange would agree with that, but it's certainly an interesting idea around how you reward people for taking on the education that their children need. Also looking at things which I know Nancy was tweeting about earlier around in-work conditionality. This is applying conditionality to a whole new group of people which haven't seen it before when universal credit comes in. I think Nancy tweeted that the person from DWP said that they'd be thinking very hard about it. I translated hopefully as an ex-civil servant that says, we have no bloody idea. Please help us. And so hopefully that's what Policy Exchange is going to be doing. So overall, final one on conditionality, I think one major problem of where the government's going, and I think, again, we'll be doing some work on this later in the year, is around sanctioning. So what do you do with people who aren't fulfilling the conditionality needs which you're putting on them? And our view at the moment is that the current system, the kind of 3 strikes and you're out, you're kicked off benefit, it's not helpful, it's not going to be applied because advisors are potentially too worried about using it. And when you do apply it, you're damaging the children and the dependence of the people that you're trying to actually help. So what we're trying to explore is other ways of sanctioning, other ways of nudging behaviour, and potentially ways which you can do that without actually damaging the dependents. So those are the kind of 3 areas that Policy Exchange are going to be thinking about over the next 12 months. My one plea is that we don't let the government get complacent and think it has welfare reform sorted because it's got universal credit and the work programme, and that we all keep pushing as hard as we can. Thanks.
Thank you, Matt. So we have a brilliant panel. We have a room full of experts, and we have discussion with all of you. I thought we might start with some sort of questions and answers, and do feel free to kind of just jump in. We heard about a lot of different things there all at once, quite a smorgasbord of different ideas. I don't know if anybody wants to go first in prodding any of our panel. Sir?
Ian Coleman, PwC. I'd just like to say to Steve, thank you for raising what I felt was by far and away the most important point of the whole day, which is that if you've got a moving target and you keep aiming at where we are today, you know you're going to miss the target tomorrow. And unless we actually try to think about what the demand pattern is going to be for employment a number of years hence, and actually design the educational and skills building programme to address that need, as opposed to simply trying to solve the deficiencies that we've inherited today, we are doomed to failure and will always in perpetual catch-up. So, breath of fresh air. How do you get any of the other speakers today to address that? Because I've sat here for the whole day, and this was the first time that was mentioned in the very last session, and yet I felt that should have been given the topic of the conference, almost the opening speech in the morning.
And perhaps I can answer that question, which is what's the policy implication then? So you're able to predict something about the patterns of skill demand in the future. What is the policy implication of that?
Yeah, so firstly, I'll slip a fiver over there in a minute. Thank you very much for your kind comments. And I think the key thing that we have to do, and the system used to be very much around predict and provide, and John Hayes might have been slightly unkind by calling it Stalinist, but certainly it was a system that tried to work out the answer and deliver skills to meet it, and that doesn't work. And it doesn't work for us in our business, and probably doesn't work for you in your organisations. The key thing that I think we have to develop in the system is what I would describe as agility, where you can respond to the changes as they happen. There's a slight problem because employers themselves don't always know what skills they're going to need in the future, although frankly I think it would be a step from where we are today to at least get them to say what they have now.
What does that agility mean in practice?
So it means, for example, the money following the economic opportunity, so the learner and the employer. But also it does need something a little bit more strategic, which can happen in the education system. And I think that's where the looking ahead and the sort of work that Professor Wilson talked about and other pieces of data that say, look, this is where we're likely to be. These are some of the competence areas that we're going to need to have and develop. Not the details, because that can be delivered later. And then finally, I think the other thing that we have to have, and it's a little bit of a cliche, but I think it's really important, and it's something we try and encourage in our organisation, which is the culture of lifelong learning. The notion that you learn at 21, the profession that you're going to work in for your lifetime, is outdated. And if you've got people who are used to learning and constantly developing, then it will mean as areas of the economy and skill sets decline, people will get the skills to move into the new ones that are creating, but only if they've got that culture built into them. And some people do, some don't.
Well, Rob, your work is very much on the same kind of lines. What was the policy implication of your great slide on changing patterns of demand in the economy?
Well, I'm certainly sympathetic with the idea that we need to, on a systematic basis, try to anticipate what is likely to happen in the future. But I'm also aware of the limitations of what we can do. We certainly can't predict things very precisely. But I think we can, using a variety of different techniques, not just the kind of quantitative projections that I talked about today, but other methods as well, peer into the future and get some understanding about which way the wind is blowing, and the sorts of things that Stephen talked about, the STEM skills. If you look at what's happening in China and some of these other countries, they're investing in huge amounts in these sorts of areas. And we are going to get left behind unless we're very careful, I think, and it needs some strategic thinking by government to intervene in that way.
But what does that push you towards? If you say looks like it's going to be more professionals, less manual workers, but more service sector type occupations, what's that? I'm trying to think beyond, saying we should be teaching those quote soft skills at school, but also focusing on STEM. Is there something further that hasn't been said yet?
Well, my personal view is that we should leave it as far as possible to individuals to make the choices. Individual kids going through the education and training system, individual education and training providers. I mean, if you talk to the Americans, I once heard their system characterised as hope and pray. We hope that our young people will graduate, and we pray they'll get a job when they do. But behind that, there's an enormous investment in trying to peer into the future. The Bureau of Labour Statistics spends millions of dollars on doing this kind of work. And there's a whole range of other activities that are associated with that, which look at the kinds of skills that people need in their jobs. So, you know, the sorts of STEM skills that Stephen was talking about, there's an enormous raft of information about the nature of the jobs in the economy and what, to the extent to which they require the sorts of STEM skills, IT skills, other sorts of numeracy and so on. So I think we could certainly learn some lessons from them.
Lots of other questions. Nancy, should we start with you and then we'll come over here?
I'm not going to do a very good job of this because it's an attempt to link several things. Okay, I'm going to shout and try and be clear. I was really pleased, as other people have said, to hear you talk about STEM. And I was also really pleased to hear Emma talk about focusing on competencies over qualifications. And I think there's some interesting stuff in the middle there. So we've got a formal education system that really punishes early specialisation. And I think that's really interesting in a STEM context because there's some research that says it's kind of easier for poor kids to catch up or excel in STEM subjects, harder in subjects like English, where kind of cultural stuff that comes with being middle class is more of an issue. But if you have GCSEs that are really unbalanced, getting into universities is very hard, even if you've got great kind of maths and science scores, if your English scores are bad. So I think there's something that happens there. And I also think there's something that happens about employers using particularly degrees as a proxy for skills that those degrees don't represent at all. So a degree of any kind becomes a gateway to a job of any kind. So I think there's something about how, about what Emma was talking about also for me, about looking at what people can actually do as opposed to a piece of paper that has kind of filtered out particularly poorer children all the way along the route. And I was interested in whether, in really, that's a question about Stephen's reaction to what Emma said about competencies and capacity, not qualifications.
Okay, I don't know if anyone in the room's got any kind of views following on from that about how you avoid that filtering out. I mean, when you said that, I immediately thought of Estelle Morris talking about, you know, at 14, what can you do for disengaged learners, that kind of stuff. And does anyone sort of challenge? There's quite a lot of people have heaped praise on STEM so far. I don't know if anyone in the room would challenge that. Two people immediately put their hand up and go here and there.
I've just recently been working, Alison Washbourne from Group Horizon, but in a previous life I've been working on a STEM project to build capacity in the community of Newcastle areas with regards to promoting STEM subjects. And what it might have been the way it's been addressed, and I'm sure there's some brilliant experiences as well, but I had spent most of that time working with bioscience degree students who have come out with a 3-year degree, not knowing where the hell they are, what the hell they're doing, why the hell they were there in the first place. And it stems a lot from going back to the schooling advice of careers and the discussion of it takes 7 years to turn that ship because it's a huge ship to turn. And as a parent of 15-year-olds and 11-year-old, it keeps me up at night because the quality of and the mixed messages of what academia and what education states with regards to knowing the basics, getting to the basics, and coming out with a job at the end. It has to be focused in what a career prospect would bring.
What's the mixed message exactly?
The mixed message tends to be, just from my experience, is someone's good at maths or physics, so they get told to stay on longer to do A-levels, to do a physics whatever A-levels, then they get told to go on to university, so that they then tied into a 3-year project. Within 6 months I did a focus group. Within 3 to 6 months, the students had forgotten why they were there. And they had no concept of what job would be there at the end of the learning they're doing. And they thought they would probably just walk into a job. And that's really just not life. It might be life in other areas of the country, but in the North East that's so not right.
Very, very interesting. There's another gentleman who would look like he was about to leap on that, and then we'll loop round again to the gentleman in the green shirt. Sorry.
Okay, yeah, Creating Prosperity, fantastic report. It doesn't rubbish what came out of the Brown report, but it does actually say that don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. STEM subjects are not the only subjects that people should be studying. I'm doing some work with Southampton Solent University at the minute, and they've got great ideas for developing and sustaining and encouraging creative industries to develop. Now, creative industries, there's a lot of interaction there between people that have got design degrees and also STEM-related subjects. Now, bear with me just for a minute, I need to explain this. Central Cities did a report a few years ago that said, I think it was called Starter for 10 or something like that, that said that the most significant contribution that universities make to local economic development was the actual spend of students within the local area, which I think is complete tosh. Southampton Solent University have got, I think it's the 4th largest graduate output within the creative industry sector. Creative industries, although there's a lot of local authorities that are pushing it at the minute, are not a panacea for economic regeneration in all areas. But if you take this concept that Michael Stork has been developing recently about specialisation, human capital and institutions, Southampton Solent can be a great anchor institution for helping, nurturing, sustaining entrepreneurialism, because that's one of the other things that they're looking at is they don't do careers, they do entrepreneurialism. So, you know, it's not, it's taking the blinkers off, it's actually thinking about what opportunities are. So I agree with you, STEM subjects are important. My 2 best grades at GCE, that was a long time ago, were maths and physics. However, I went on to do a history degree, and now I'm a labour market economist, or so I'm told. But, you know, so we don't all have to do STEM, but, you know, having the basics in maths and physics would be great, but I do think you need to have the English to go with it as well.
Mr. Gentleman, be very patient just before we bring the panel in again.
So my name is Rupert Hurley, I'm the CEO of Digital. We do multi-channel publishing solutions and internet development. It's more of a sort of question. If this doesn't get sorted now, by 2020 there's going to be a huge problem, because, you know, we're already paying developers in India and other offshore countries, you know, 100, 200 quid a day for skills that you can't get. We want, you know, to have the staff in the UK, we just can't find them. So what are the implications that the panel sees if we don't fix this? Because the UK's position, you know, it's obvious, you know, IT is the way to go. It's one of the few growth markets that's not being sort of knackered at the moment. If we don't fix this, how is it going to not only affect the country, but also the IT market and how we sort of develop in that over the next sort of 7 years?
So weigh in on that.
So, can I start? So several good points there. I mean, firstly, were that the problem that everybody was doing STEM? So I quite agree. There's lots of other great subjects, and you know, everybody should do the one that suits them best. And my point was that there's lots of people who could do it and would do well at it, who are discouraged from doing it or rationed and prevented from doing it. And on that point to link back to that point around capability, if you look at the technical people in Microsoft, they've pretty much all done some sort of STEM subject, but they usually haven't done computing. They've done physics or maths or something like that. So what you're doing there is generating a generic capability that can get you into jobs in financial services, in biotech, in teaching, in the IT industry. It's a useful set of competencies that we need to have in the economy. And in answer to your question, briefly, I mean, what'll happen is, I work with lots of employers, and in fact, I've got a great apprenticeship program for software developers, so we should catch up later. But the employers I work with, mainly small companies, their first choice is to hire somebody local, and I don't just mean UK, I mean actually from their town, to work for them, and they'll do that if they can. If they just can't find somebody, then they'll bring somebody in from elsewhere, potentially from overseas within the EU or elsewhere. And then, and only then, if they can't possibly do that and they can't grow their business, they will ultimately, these businesses are mobile, they will actually relocate and we'll lose them out of the UK economy altogether. So that's not their first choice. And what we have to do, I think, in terms of the education system and from a policy point of view, is to make sure that that first option, which is their default option, is available to them, is the easiest, and then I believe that they'll step up and do it. And pleased to hear that you'd be prepared to if you could find the people.
Yeah, I mean, we've got an office down in Devon, and there's just nobody with the skills that we need down there.
Yeah.
And we're a Microsoft business partner.
Oh, great. Well, anyway, I'll show you afterwards how you can grow your own, but you know, there's certainly it's something that we need to make sure we can do.
I wonder if I could just sort of, unless you want to go on.
I just had a quick point about, I mean, we're talking a lot about what government and business can do here, but I think we do have to think about also what the incentives are for the kids to get the right sorts of education and what they're planning to do. I know Rhys Morgan spoke at one of the events earlier. I didn't make it long, but I've spoken to them before, and it's either them or one of their partner organisations had a brilliant bit of research looking at, I think, kids at 16, 15 and 16 and what they expect to go and get jobs in. And something like 80% said hairdressing or kind of film star or something. It's like, that's just not going to happen. And I think 1% of girls said they wanted to go into engineering or would even consider going into engineering. And it has to be about actually making, in some way, people at school realise where there are jobs available and what sorts of career kind of education paths there are to getting those jobs. Because at the moment, I just don't think that's there. And in part, that's responsibility of business to go into schools and whatever to do that. In part, it's about government. It's also a responsibility of all of us to kind of push it down to our children and what have you. So it's about, I think it's three prongs. So it's individuals, government, and business.
I think there are measures in place to try and develop a better careers database that would help to inform young people. I mean, I certainly don't think it's a good idea to try and precisely predict exactly which kind of scientist or IT specialist we're going to need, and then try to advise young people to aim for that. But I think what we can do is to provide them with useful advice about the way things are going. And there's lots of evidence that people will follow incentives. So if they know there are lots of good opportunities to do the sorts of jobs that you're talking about, that are well paid, and they know what kind of subjects they need to study in order to get to that point, then people will follow those routes. But they need to be better informed about what the needs are.
Can I just pick up on the point that the gentleman made about the Solent LEP in the university down there? And that's a real good example of actually how you can generate that sort of environment. I worked down there as a district manager when we set up what was called the Solent Local Enterprise Partnership. And the trick that we pulled there was that we actually made it private sector employer-led. So you have lots of local enterprise partnerships that are made of public sector, private sector, and various organisations, education institutions. But I think what really made it work down in the Solent was it was all private sector led, employer led, and public sector like myself. And we took a back seat and just took the outcome. So the employers in that area, led by Deborah Humphreys, who was the chancellor, the head of the university, they defined the offer. And actually what we did down there, we set out a range of routes into employment. So there was the STEM there was the sort of like higher education stuff around engineering, but you've got the Solent down there. There's lots of employers down there who would take people on directly from universities to do all of their thesis and stuff like that. But there were also the other routes, the vocational routes, for those that were sort of like at a lower level of education. And there was a real mixture down there. And if there was a model that you guys want to actually go and look at, see how that works, that's a really good one to go and see.
There's a gentleman in the second row.
Yeah, I just wanted to, my name's Les McCann from Marstow. It's a startup academy we're running at last week. And I just wanted to touch on Matt's point about the advice that's given to youngsters in school. For me, it's not particularly about whether it's good to do STEM subjects or other, maybe more arts-based subjects. In fact, I think the way the dynamic of our economy now, it's moving away from a one profession. You learn one thing and that's what you do for the rest of your life. We're seeing more and more through academic literature and other sources that it's about a sort of hybrid of knowledge, if you will. I mean, I think STEM subjects are close to my heart because I'm an engineer by training, but I'm embarking on a different PhD in business and management. So you see there where the two appear to be stark contrast of each other, but when you bring about a synergy of the two, you can then start to be a bit more creative in what you can bring about. And just a last point about the advice of children. I've got a younger brother who's in a similar situation to me. He's very good at STEM subjects, but unlike me, who knew exactly what I wanted to do, he didn't. And he has no idea about what the opportunities are actually out there for STEM subjects. All he knows is the famous ones and probably the one his brother did. And I think if schools would invest more in different subjects such as PSHE, I know when I was in school it was a bit of a joke, a bit of a fun session, but I've grown to see how important those sorts of subjects are for the whole well-being of life, actually. And if we could get youngsters to actually buy into why they're doing what they're doing, and not just because they've been told to do it or it leads to this and A plus B is equal to C in life, because it doesn't actually equate that way, then we might get some better results.
Interesting point. So this, discussion so far has been quite heavily leaning on the kind of the education kind of angle of things. I wonder if I could, just before we close, look at sort of another dimension, which is something that Chris sort of